we're just hours away from the latest deadline in the rolling debacle that is Donald Trump's self-inflicted trade war. At midnight tonight, Trump's latest round of disastrous global tariffs are set to kick in. And since we've been here before, we know that means Trump is either about to chicken out again or crash the stock market or a combination of the two. And in the lead up to this latest deadline, Trump has insisted that he is not changing his mind this time. But tonight, on the eve of this deadline, Trump released a new order announcing brand new, completely made up tariff rates, probably with the same fake equation that he has used before, for a whole host of different countries. And shocker, these new tariffs make even less sense than before. For instance, he is raising the tariff on Canada from 25% to 35%, while at the same time exempting the vast majority of products that Canada actually exports to the United States. With every new iteration of these tariffs, Trump has injected more uncertainty, more chaos into the global economy and certainly the economy here at home. But today, we got a little sliver of hope that something might soon stop Trump from making this matter any worse. This morning, a federal appeals court heard oral arguments in a pair of lawsuits challenging Trump's authority to unilaterally impose these tariffs. And the judges in that case sounded pretty skeptical about whether Trump really had the power to do all of this on his own. I mean, one judge told Trump's lawyers, quote, "One of the major concerns that I have is that the law Trump cites for this authority doesn't even mention the tariffs anywhere." Another judge said that during these same arguments, quote, "It's just hard for me to see that Congress intended to give the president the wholesale authority to throw out the tariff schedule that Congress has adopted after years of careful work and revised every one of these tariff rates." Yeah. I mean, that skepticism makes sense. After all, Trump's arguments for why he is allowed to impose these tariffs have never made any sense. He claimed that this is all about combating a national emergency, but what that emergency is keeps changing. I mean, one day it's rebalancing trade, the next it's about fentanyl trafficking, the next day it's about stopping the criminal trial of a fellow authoritarian coup plotter. Who knows what it'll be tomorrow? The only consistent theme is that Trump seems to think he can just impose whatever tariffs he wants for whatever reason he feels like on that particular day. That is what this is really about for Trump. He wants to rule like a king, doing whatever he wants, saying whatever he wants. Consequences be damned. But as president, everything you do and say has real consequences. And when you try to rule like a king, you just end up making things worse. That was exactly how the lawyer arguing these tariffs began his arguments today.
Thank you, Chief Judge Moore, and may it please the court. You just heard an argument in responses to Judges Hughes, Stark, and Dyke that our federal courts are powerless, that the president can do whatever he wants, whenever he wants, for as long as he wants, so long as he declares an emergency. That is as major a question as it gets, a breathtaking claim to power that no president has asserted in 200 years, and the consequences are staggering.
If that voice sounded familiar, that's because the lawyer who argued against these tariffs in court today was former Solicitor General Neal Katyal. Joining me now is Neal Katyal, one of the best legal minds out there, who just spent the day arguing a case. So I'm so grateful he's still here with us at 9:15. He is a former acting Solicitor General of the United States and is currently representing a coalition of businesses challenging Donald Trump's tariffs. So we just played a part of your opening argument there, which I feel like distilled it really, really well for people to understand. And Trump has now, for years, has now talked about his tariff plan, which is a power of Congress, not the executive. But walk us through the legal argument of your case and what case you made today in court.
Yeah, and I will do so, and it's such a privilege to be with you again, Jen. And what I want to do is, I'm not trying to retry the case in the public media or anything like that, but just give our viewers a sense of what the case is about, what the stakes are, and the like. And, you know, basically, Donald Trump imposed these massive tariffs on Americans, really the largest tax increase since Bill Clinton in 1993. It's going to cost every American family an average of at least $1,300 per year. And he did this on his own say-so, without going to Congress, without a whiff of congressional debate, none of it. And what we argued in court today on behalf of small businesses across America, and supported by entities as diverse as the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and, you know, members of Congress and the like, is that that's not our constitutional system. We fought a revolutionary war in part about the idea that tariffs and taxation are tempting things for kings, and you can't have the executive have those powers. They have to be located in the branch that's closest to the people, which is the Congress of the United States. And so what I said was that this is the first time really in American history that a president has ever said, I've got these sweeping powers to tariff. It's literally never happened before. And if the president really wants those powers, he should do what he did in the first administration, go to Congress and ask for them. He tried it the first time around. Congress said no. But he's got to try, and he's got to do it that way. He can't just do it on his own.
It's not like his own party doesn't control both houses of Congress, but he may want to just be a king. So let me ask you, Neil, because one of the things that we have been talking about a little bit is just the shifting explanations. It makes it really hard for the public to follow and understand, makes it hard for businesses to plan for the uncertainty. But some of this is, he threatened today not to negotiate with Canada if they recognize Palestine. He's been threatening Brazil because of a legal case against an aspiring authoritarian dictator over there. There's a fentanyl. He extended that because of fentanyl. There's different explanations for the quote unquote emergencies. That is something that's hard to understand from a public messaging standpoint and for businesses. But does it play into the legal argument?
100%. And you heard the judges today at the nation's second highest court, the Court of Appeals, basically ask the government lawyer those questions, which is, what in the world is the emergency that's so unexpected and unusual? Once you say it's trade deficits, another time you say it's military readiness, another time it's this, it's that. It reminds me of, those shell games that you see being played on the streets where, people are constantly moving what's under the shell. And that appears to be what's been happening here. And I do think it causes a grave amount of concern. I mean, maybe in the most extreme circumstance, Jen, in which Congress isn't able to act and you have some new sudden emergency that you want to give the president some powers. But boy, trade deficits is the opposite of that. I mean, the president's own executive order says trade deficits have been a persistent feature of the U.S. economy for every year of the last 50 years. And the law that he's invoking to try and impose tariffs, which, as you said to our viewers, and you showed the questions from the judges, the law doesn't even mention tariffs. The one thing it does mention is that the president must identify an unusual and extraordinary threat. And the president basically pled himself out of court today because his own executive order says these trade deficits are the opposite of what's unusual and extraordinary. They're persistent, they're commonplace, they're a routine fact of life in the American economy.
Before I let you go, Neil, I know you've had a long day. What's next here? A lot of people watching, Trump just put out an executive order. It's very confusing, hard to follow. What's next? What can we expect from the courts?
Well, we hope the court does give a resolution really soon because, Jen, these are, yes, it's nice to talk about these abstract legal things, separation of powers, the Constitution, Article 1, and the like. But at the end of the day, this is about you and me and small businesses across America and large businesses who are asking, what are the rules going forward? I mean, we've careened from one day to the next since January 20th when it comes to tariff policy. We need some certainty around this. And so my hope is that the federal courts will resolve this quickly. I suspect, my personal view is this isn't a difficult constitutional or legal question, and that our businesses in America can go forward and understand what the rules are.
Neil Katyal, I always love talking to you. Thank you so much for joining me, taking the time this evening.
Thank you.
I think we were shocked by it. Especially to use the term stolen. Because she's not an object. She's a person who's recruited at Mar-a-Lago, his property, place where she was looking forward to having fun that summer. And it just kind of makes us wonder, how much he knew.
It's a very good question. Joining us at the table to discuss, MSNBC legal analyst Mary McCord. She is a former principal deputy assistant attorney general for the National Security Division. And MSNBC political analyst David Corn is also with us. He is the Washington bureau chief for Mother Jones. Such a heart-wrenching interview. Oh, my goodness. Her family shouldn't have had to do that.
Yeah. Mary, you prosecuted sex crimes for a few years in the past. And one of the things that I think MSNBC has done a good job of, but not everybody, is thinking about the survivors first, having conversations about the survivors. And now you see Hallie Jackson having an interview with her family. When you hear those kinds of things, to me, it feels like the White House is forgetting that too, that they're forgetting about the survivors, and there's almost a lack of empathy in their conversation talking about this.
This entire story since it broke, right? The focus has all been on let's get the evidence, let's find out who the culprits were, right? With, I think, a total lack of emphasis on the victims. Now, I was here the other night, and we did talk about the serious nature of these crimes. And as someone who prosecuted child sex offenses, I worked with victims, I worked with victims' families. What I just heard that family say is so reminiscent, right? Sometimes it was, a boyfriend of the mother of a child, right? And you would have similar kind of dramatic statements from families about, honestly, did mom know about what the boyfriend was doing? And here it's, did the president, not the president at the time, know about what Jeffrey Epstein was doing? I mean, how many teenagers were being, quote unquote, stolen by Epstein from his spas? I mean, certainly it's more than one, because the president complained about it, right? And said he complained about it. So I am glad, I'm glad that Hallie did that interview. And not all victims or their families want to speak out, but if they do, people need to know that we're in this swirl of a debate, and Congress is involved, and so many people, give me the goods, give me the goods, give me the goods. These are real people's lives, people who were broken as children, and that kind of abuse sticks with you the rest of your life.
More than 1,000, at least 1,000 survivors in the document.
And I think to both your points, David, that idea that there are so many other individuals who are involved in this, it begs the point. Can you release everything so we have a better understanding of what's happening? You have Ms. Giuffre's sister-in-law, Amanda Roberts, making the point that Ms. Giuffre was herself fighting for that release, noting she had a little bit of hope in her, because it was said that the files were going to be released, and she wanted everything that happened to her very clearly, and everyone else who was implicated in that wanted that to be released. And it was she was still fighting for that before she left us. So I think she wants what we all want, is transparency and justice. Talk about that piece of it, because that wraps in everybody, like Eugene just put on the table.
Well, there's a right way to do this and a wrong way to do it.
Yeah.
And the reason why this has even become an issue is because Donald Trump and others on the right for years have been pushing this crazy conspiracy theory, right? That it was first Pizzagate, then QAnon, that there's this satanic, cannibalistic group of globalists who are sex trafficking children. They never had any evidence till Jeffrey Epstein came along. And they used that as the manifestation of this crazy, almost theological notion that has infiltrated MAGA. And so they just became kind of obsessed with this. And all they wanted to do was get it out, get it out, get it out, not thinking about what it means for victims or even thinking about the right way to do this. They concocted this crazy notion that there's a clients list. There's no indication there's a clients list of any sort out there. I mean, there's records out there. And they really thought this would be the Rosetta Stone proving this gigantic global conspiracy that would bring down all the elites that they hate. They can't stand. And so they were just, Kash Patel, Don Bongino, all these others for years have been just saying, we just got to release the files without knowing what that actually means. And the way to do this, I mean, you know this, Mary, from working with grand jury, testimony and materials, is you need to review it. And sometimes you need, I won't say a special counsel, but somebody to go in there who can say, okay, this stuff, we got to talk to the victims first. We got to see what we can redact. And there's a right way and wrong way. But they didn't care. And now Trump is kind of hoisted on his own petard here by making this the holy grail of MAGA.
Right, right.
He fed he stoked the fire. And the thing about a fire is when you light it, it is uncontrollable. You can't, you don't know, they could not have known where this was going to go. It just literally makes no sense to me why Donald Trump trafficked in this conspiracy theory around the real crimes of Jeffrey Epstein in the first place when he was friends with Jeffrey Epstein.
Video of it. It's not like we were maybe friends.
Yeah, not maybe friends. Like, we have B-roll that we could put up on the screen right now of him kikiing and laughing with Jeffrey Epstein. What is so, I really feel for Virginia Giuffre's family. I feel for, look at this. Look, like he knew Jeffrey Epstein. I feel for all of the families and the survivors that are still with us because Donald Trump he invoked these young women these girls that were working at his establishment in the spa, if you will. He invoked their story as if to give him cover.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's what it was, Mary. The reason we even know, because Virginia Giuffre is the only person that has ever been on record that we know of that worked at Mar-a-Lago and was recruited by Ghislaine Maxwell. She's the only person that has ever said that's her story. It's the president that told us this. I don't know if it's a lie or if he's telling us more truth about the fact that, oh, no, there are lots of people that Jeffrey Epstein tried to take from me.
And said it as a slight to him.
Exactly.
And called him a creep, right?
Yeah.
And then the question was, what is he a creep for? Is it for taking girls or because because the president did point out the other day in the comments we talked about a few nights ago, they were people who worked in massage at the spa. So what do you think? So that's why the family's asking these questions. Did he know that?
You know what interests me is his story has shifted. Mm-hmm. It really has. It began with he was a creep because he hit on the daughter of a club member. Someone was there. Okay, that's an explanation. Then it was that, well, he stole one person from me. Now he stole two people from me. And Carolyn Levitt came out today or yesterday and said the problem was he was a creep to the employees of Mar-a-Lago. Not that he stole or recruited them or Ghislaine recruited them, but that he was creepy to them. So, I mean, these are slight differences, but they are differences.
They're evolutions. They are clear evolutions.
I don't understand why there's not a clear story. I mean, if I was a good friend with someone like Jeffrey Epstein, and then
But you weren't.
Which I wasn't, and I broke with that guy,
yes.
I would be bragging about that for years afterwards. He broke, he says before the first prosecution, and I would know the details pretty damn well.
Can you tell us a little bit about your meeting with Laura Loomer and Mike Waltz today, and how that came about?
So Laura Loomer is a very good patriot. She is a very strong person. And I saw her yesterday for a little while. She makes recommendations of things and people, and sometimes I listen to those recommendations.
What did she recommend?
She recommended certain people for jobs.
Adding to the administration, not
adding,
who did she
not
recommend?
firing.
Well, she'll recommend that too.
Back in April, President Trump had that to say about right-wing conspiracy theorist Laura Loomer, the woman who has called 9/11 an inside job, who said racist things about Kamala Harris, and in 2017 was banned from using both Uber and Lyft for an anti-Muslim tweet storm. According to the president, Loomer is making good recommendations of who to hire and fire, an influence that has only seemed to grow since Trump made those comments. She has now, according to a count by the Daily Beast, taken the scalps of 15 individuals in the Trump administration, not Biden holdovers, people in the Trump administration. She even has a word for it. From reporting in the New York Times, she describes it as being Loomered. After that article was published, the employment offer for a woman named Jen Easterly, do you remember this woman, who led the nation's cybersecurity agency under President Joe Biden? Well, it was pulled. Loomer has criticized Easterly after her name was announced, saying, quote, there are clearly a lot of Biden holdovers at the DOD undermining the Trump administration. Joining our conversation, MSNBC senior contributing editor Michelle Norris, plus former Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs during the Obama administration, MSNBC political analyst Rick Stengel. Michelle, it's funny, when we saw President Trump making those comments, his Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick was standing right behind him. And so on one hand, you could say this woman has absolutely no experience in government, in management, in leadership in any way, even being part of a corporation in any organized fashion. But I think back to the transition when Howard Lutnick said the most important thing you need to be part of this administration, and to be clear, she doesn't have an official role, is loyal to Donald Trump. And she certainly has that in spades. What's your take on the influence she has in this administration?
Well, we shouldn't be surprised that people get fired the way that they do and with that they get fired this often, because the man who's leading the country used to take glee in telling people you're fired when he was at the center of the television show, The Apprentice. She is who she is, and she has made this her calling card, and so more people will probably get Loomered in the future. But to me, this is really about competency and this idea that they've set a standard that's about loyalty before merit. We've heard a lot about so-called DEI hires. They have introduced a standard of LBM hires, people who are in their jobs principally because they are loyal to Donald Trump. And I just, don't know that this is a standard that would work anywhere else. And the American public has to decide if this is something that is acceptable. Would this be acceptable in the hospital where you're going to get treated for cancer, or delivering a baby, in the school where your kids are taught, in the place where people are making decisions about your financial well-being, because all your savings are there? Is it okay for someone to be there because they are loyal to the person at the top, or do you want someone who's actually competent? And that's the real problem here, is that it's not just about Laura Loomer. It's about a standard that has been established within our government, where loyalty is more important than anything else, including merit and competency.
Rick, that's a hugely important point. This isn't about Laura Loomer. When you think back to the first Trump administration, his greatest frustration was not Democrats. It was people in his own administration who were adhering to the rule of law or the American people, and not him. You think back to his frustration with whether it was John Kelly or H.R. McMaster or Rex Tillerson. This is about Donald Trump.
Yes, Stephanie. Everybody in the executive branch takes an oath, a loyalty oath, not to Donald Trump, not to the president, but to the Constitution of the United States. They work for the American people in service to the Constitution. And as Michelle so eloquently said, when loyalty trumps expertise, that's something that's not good for the American public. And I would say that it's not a form of strength. As a leader, if you have loyalty be the absolute top virtue, that means you don't have much confidence in yourself. That means you're not hiring people to give you a different opinion. And I just want to add, if I can, because you mentioned her in the top, I worked with Jeanette Easterly for 3 years when I was in the Obama administration. She was then working at the White House in counterintelligence. She's worked for Democratic and Republican presidents. She's a graduate of West Point herself. She's a Rhodes Scholar. She served in Iraq and Afghanistan in cybersecurity and intelligence. She's one of the most competent people in the world at this. And the idea that she shouldn't be a professor at West Point because she worked for 4 years in the Biden administration, that's a sad day. That's a sad day when the commander of West Point responds to the head of the Army by firing someone who's absolutely competent, who has stood up for decades for the values of West Point.
You know, in the New York Times reporting on Loomer, they discussed how one of the ways she comes up with her conclusions is she gets tips on her website, many of them anonymous tips, where she gets information about administration officials. This is the vetting process our White House is relying on. Laura Loomer is saying, tell me what you want to tell me about these people from anyone. And she then funnels that to the president. This is how our White House is operating? Michelle?
Is that for me?
Well,
sorry. Okay.
I wasn't sure who should jump in there, but, you know, I will say that times when the government does create tip lines, you know, for people to do exactly that, to call in, and then in the name of transparency and to create some sort of engagement with the public. This is not an example of that. It also raises a question about the vetting process that the current administration is using for people when they bring them in, if they're vulnerable to this kind of thing. But, you know, an anonymous tip that's coming from someone who is herself not vetted, and to the extent that she is vetted, as you noted, was not able to work in the campaign and was not able to work in the administration, it's very troubling. One thing that is probably coming down the line here are some lawsuits, because of the way that people are being dismissed, because of the standards that are being used in their dismissal. I imagine that some of the people who are being shown the door will probably come back knocking with their lawyers in tow.
Wow. All right, slightly new topic. Yesterday, we saw the Senate narrowly confirm Joe Kent. This is Trump's pick to be the director of National Counterterrorism Center. I want to share Kent during his confirmation hearing. Watch this.
Do you believe that the violence on January 6th was intentionally organized or directed?
Still under investigation. We're looking into whether elements of the government could have enhanced the criminal acuity of some of the rioters that day.
So you've said on Twitter that the FBI and the intelligence community were involved in planning and directing the riot. Is that correct?
Sounds like something I said, yeah.
Okay, so not only have we whitewashed January 6th, one of the most violent days in our lifetimes that we all witnessed at the Capitol, but you now have the head of counterterrorism believing conspiracies about that day. Rick?
Yes, we have the inmates who are being made the head of the asylum. That seems to be happening all across the administration. And it dovetails with the previous discussion because it's not about expertise, which this gentleman obviously does not have. It's about loyalty. And, I'm going to make one other point about this. I also worked with NCTC when I was at the State Department. It's the people who are there are super smart. They're super knowledgeable. But one of the things that gives a flaw to the Trump administration's idea that supposedly they're streamlining government or making government more efficient is that they're putting every empty spot in every agency, they're appointing somebody in it. I would say, the NCTC budget is classified. If there's redundancies in government, it is in the intelligence area and the counterterrorism area. Why aren't they looking at reforming the institution? Why are they automatically putting someone else at the head of it? And by the way, the FBI in the last administration and still holding over here said that the greatest terrorism threat to America is domestic, not international. This organization just looks at international threats.
Back to the business in Washington, the Senate rejected two measures that would have blocked $675 million worth of bombs and firearms to Israel, but with a growing number of Democrats supporting the resolutions. They're proposed by independent Senator Bernie Sanders, who wants to stop the sale of bombs and assault rifles to Israel. While both measures were voted down, the first resolution did receive 27 votes in favor, 25 of which came from Democrats. The other two yes votes were from Sanders and fellow independent Senator Angus King. Richard Haass, what do you make of this vote that it passed, but it didn't pass, it was stopped, but at least 27 members of the United States Senate, a quarter more, are saying we need to stop and talk about what's happening inside Gaza right now?
Well, Willie, it's part of a larger conversation. We're seeing it with that. We're seeing it in Europe. With the French and British positions that come September, they're going to independently, unilaterally recognize a Palestinian state. Now Canada is saying it will do the same thing. Essentially, Israel is forfeiting the high ground. It's obviously a combination of the pictures of hungry young people, the lack of food aid and humanitarian aid getting into Gaza, also the use of force. Probably now close to 60,000 people have been killed in Gaza. And even if you say 20,000 were Hamas fighters, that still leaves 40,000 people, 35,000 people who weren't. Plus, this 2 million population has now been forced into 25% of Gaza's territory. So essentially, there is a humanitarian crisis. Israel is at least partially, if not wholly, not wholly, but partially responsible for it. And what we're beginning to see is the change in international public thinking about Israel. And Israel has to be careful here. In the United States, you do not want this issue of Israeli support to become a totally partisan issue. And second, more broadly, Israel doesn't want to make itself the pariah. And I think there's a warning here. And the real question is, will this reverberate in Israeli politics? So far, not, but I think it should.
Part of that warning came yesterday, as you mentioned, from Canada, which now plans to recognize the state of Palestine during the UN General Assembly in September. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney made that announcement yesterday. It comes one day after the United Kingdom said it would do the same, barring a ceasefire in Gaza. Last week, French President Emmanuel Macron said his country also will recognize Palestine. President Trump's special envoy to the Middle East is said to travel to Israel to discuss the crisis in Gaza today. Overnight, President Trump posted on social media that Canada's support for Palestinian statehood would make it very hard for the U.S. to make a trade deal with Canada, Joe.
Yeah, the two aren't connected, and they shouldn't be connected. When you have John Heilman Of course, you still have many of Israel's Netanyahu's, I'll say, staunchest defenders, still claiming there's nothing to see here. Move along, and we are seeing some of that. The fact is, you have the International Red Cross talking about all the deaths, talking about the horrific conditions there, talking about the famine or near famine conditions that are there right now. You have Israeli human rights groups that are aggressively speaking out against what's going on in Gaza. And yes, there are the pictures. There's not the reporting that we should have coming from there because Israel's army will not allow reporters in a lot of these areas. So what they do then is they say, well, there's no reporting of this, so it's all fabricated by Hamas. No, it's not fabricated by Hamas. These are reports from the International Red Cross, the United Nations. And again, as I said, even Israeli groups are now talking about the horrific conditions that the Palestinians are living in right now. And as we look to the vote in the Senate, those are more votes than any of us would have ever counted before, would ever expect. But I think more importantly for Israel and for people who have supported Israel their entire life, such as myself, you need to look at the numbers. You need to look at where younger Americans are. I grew up in the church and just with an innate belief that Israel had a right to exist and that Israel was America's staunchest ally in the Middle East, and we always needed to stand shoulder to shoulder with Israel. That's what the majority of Americans have believed throughout our lifetimes. That is changing with younger Americans. And the images that are coming out of Gaza right now are poison to Israel's long-term strength and standing not only across the world, but especially in the United States, its staunchest, longest ally.
Yeah, and I think, Joe, I was talking yesterday to David Miliband from the International Rescue Committee, and he, said that on the basis of what he hears on a daily basis from IRC aid workers who are over there trying to distribute humanitarian aid, that it's very clear that Benjamin Netanyahu's claims that the reason that there is the humanitarian aid isn't getting through is because it's being stolen or diverted by Hamas are, if not entirely untrue, largely untrue, and that the solution of dropping aid from the air is creating more problems. If there is any diversion happening by Hamas, it makes it more likely for it to be diverted when you drop it from the air. And also causes chaos on the ground, a lot of injuries among people scrambling for that food aid that it gets through. That from Miliband's point of view, you got to lift this blockade and let accredited humanitarian aid groups get through. And when that was true during the ceasefire earlier this year, the problems that we're seeing on the ground now, this kind of horrific, appalling starvation conditions, they went away. When aid was allowed to go through, the ceasefire was happening, the hunger was manageable. Now it's not, and I will say, we had David Remnick on the show earlier this week, I should say, and the striking thing is, as David pointed out, is voices from inside Israel, credible voices, people from within the Israeli security services and within the military, and the former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, who are starting to use words like genocide and like war crimes around a policy that looks to them like intentional starvation of civilians in this conflict, and that is, to your point, robs Israel of moral authority and is going to be a huge political problem for it already, but certainly an increasing one down the line.
So right now we know that President Trump has told people he's been really bothered by some of the images he's seen come out of Gaza in recent days of malnourished, starving children. We know the president's sometimes very impacted by occasions the images he sees of gruesome images, Ukraine and the like. But Susan Page, there's been no meaningful accompanying change of U.S. policy yet towards Israel. In fact, last night, President Trump made clear he's not willing to take the step that the UK, France, and Canada have done in recognizing a Palestinian state. But there is some concern that people I've talked to in D.C. the last couple of days in the Trump universe about how this is another issue where he seems a little out of step with some of the MAGA base. No doubt, Republican support of Israel has been steadfast for a long time. It's GOP orthodoxy. But others in MAGA world, more the isolationist wing, are like, we don't want the U.S. involved in another foreign entanglement. And they're seeing this humanitarian crisis and feel like some sort of change might be needed. Combine that with the vote we saw yesterday, it seems like the political calculus here is changing in D.C.
Yeah, I think that's right. You know, we've seen President Trump really install on domestic terms the MAGA agenda he talked about during the campaign. That has not been the case on several of the big foreign policy issues, including Ukraine, where we see a shift in the attitude toward Russia to the surprise of many. We see the willingness of President Trump to be involved in disputes around the world, including the border battles between Cambodia and Thailand. That was not something I think we could have predicted. And now we're looking at what's happened with Israel. No one has been a stauncher ally of Israel than Donald Trump and of Benjamin Netanyahu, an ally of Benjamin Netanyahu. So does he take the cue from some foreign leaders, our allies in Canada and Great Britain and France, to take stronger action that sends a message to Netanyahu and to Israel that what's happening in Gaza is unacceptable? That is not something we would have predicted Donald Trump would be doing, but I think it is possible that we are going to see Trump move in some ways to try to put some pressure on Israel to take care of this humanitarian catastrophe that we see unfolding there.
And Willie, though it doesn't seem proper to be talking about the politics of this situation for Donald Trump. Certainly people inside the White House calculate that every day, like they do inside every White House. And the fact is, there's not a massive political downside for Donald Trump stepping out and speaking out against Netanyahu and what's going on there, despite the fact that Donald Trump has often said he's Israel's best ally. He's Netanyahu's best ally. 70% of Jewish voters in America voted for Kamala Harris, and that's about what Democrats get every 4 years. So if they're making political calculations inside the White House, him stepping up and speaking out certainly would not hurt his standing in the polls. It wouldn't hurt his standing politically. There may be a lot of grumbling on the inside, but we've seen that with the Epstein files as well. And Donald Trump's continued to do what he's done, and he's, stayed at 88, 89% among the Republican Party members.
Yeah, and it wasn't that long ago President Trump was talking about Netanyahu doing whatever he had to do to, quote, finish the job. Remember, he was talking about turning Gaza into beachfront resort property. But, right. Richard, now he's talking about, quote, real starvation. He's criticizing Netanyahu for that. And you've heard, to John's point about MAGA, Marjorie Taylor Greene calling it genocide this week, the first Republican member of Congress to do that.
Yeah, these are all straws in the wind. It's not genocide. You can have a more serious conversation about war crimes. The president can do things. What he should not do, I would argue, Willie, is do what the British and French and Canadians are doing. To say you're going to have a Palestinian state, no, that's not the way to do it. You want Palestinians to earn it. You want Palestinians to say, here's the conditions we're prepared to sign up to. They got to reassure Israel. At the end of the day, a Palestinian state cannot be imposed from the outside. So again, this is all signs that the world has grown weary with what Israel is doing in Gaza and increasingly opposes it. But the president has political standing in Israel that even Bibi Netanyahu doesn't have. If the president wants to move the needle in Gaza, he can do it. He can put pressure on Israel, not by declaring support for a Palestinian state unconditionally, but by pushing the Israelis to come up with a day after plan, to stop, to open up the area, Gaza to food aid, to stop new settlements in the West Bank. There's a lot of things this president can do if he really wants to get serious about promoting positive movement between Israelis and Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. So far, he's been reluctant to do it, but the opportunity, some would argue the necessity is there.
Donald Trump's August 1st deadline is here. Well, almost. Tomorrow is the day new tariffs are set to take effect. The president's 90-day pause gave importers a chance to stockpile at a lower tariff rate, and many companies planned ahead, but some brands are already announcing price hikes. Joining us now, former chair of the Council of Economic Advisors under President Biden, Jared Bernstein, and director of economic policy research at Veda Partners, Henrietta Treyz. And Henrietta, starting with you, we know that prices are going to go up. At least we've had announcements from Adidas, Procter & Gamble, Walmart, Ralph Lauren, Mattel, Subaru, Nike. that's not a small amount of companies. Are more on the horizon?
Yes, more on the horizon. One of the biggest that I'm still waiting for right now is towards Canada, understanding what the tariffs are going to be there, if they're going to get that 90-day delay that Mexico just got. There are tariff hikes coming across the gamut of everything that you're buying for, vehicles, back to school, sneakers, anything you're using for camp and after school activities. All that stuff is on the chopping block and subject to what will be tomorrow as high as 40% tariffs on, sneakers and all the apparel you wear to spend your summer months.
Jared, the president continues to frame these tariffs as a charge on countries. So walk us through this. Help us understand by tomorrow when these tariffs take effect, if a product comes into the U.S. from another country, who's paying the bill?
The importer, the U.S. company that imports the good, they pay the bill, full stop. Now, after that, they try to pass that cost down the chain. So that means importers, then wholesalers, retailers, distributors, all the way down to the last person in that chain holding the bag, and that's the consumer. And the history of this, this is empirical work that we've done over the years, so this isn't that much of a guessing game, is that the bulk of the pass-through lands with the consumer. She's at the end of the chain. She's the one who's going to feel the most of this. And as you've suggested, we're already seeing signs of that.
And Henrietta, as you can imagine, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has a take on who's going to pay for this. Here was his comment right here on this air last week.
Who pays the tariffs is a choice, and what we've seen thus far is that the manufacturers are eating a substantial portion of the tariffs and taking it into their profit margins.
So is it a choice? Will the companies then absorb the costs, or are we going to all pay more for all of the things we like to buy?
Yeah, no, the data is exactly the opposite of what Secretary Bessent is suggesting. The manufacturers are importing even more of their products right now in the run up to August 1st, tomorrow, because they know that the tariffs are coming. So they're trying to front end load all of their inventory to help them mitigate what will ultimately be these 20, 30, 40, even 50 in the case of Brazil, tariffs on all their imports. So it's not that they're shifting their manufacturing, they're just pulling forward all their inventory in the hopes of getting in ahead. That's going to come to a screeching halt at midnight tonight. And those costs are going to be passed on to consumers.
Jared, is this just the first sign that we may see inflation start rising? And could the effects of this start carrying through the third and fourth quarter?
Well, first of all, let me point out that there are two buffers in front of the consumer. One is the inventory buildup that you just heard about, and the other is what Scott Bessent said, profit margins, squeezing profit margins. Those buffers are now demonstrably eroding. Companies can't do that forever. Eventually, the inventory build down gets run down, and at some point, you have to start protecting your margins. That's where we're at right now. I do believe that we're going to see more of this. I think we're seeing the tip of the spear. And one reason I believe that is the list of companies you showed at the beginning of this segment. Now, every one of those companies know that they're getting on Donald Trump's wrong side when they do what they did, which is go out and say, we can't help it, we're going to have to raise prices on consumers. So there are incentives for them not to do that. The fact that they're doing that, I believe, is going to give permission to many more retailers, wholesalers, distributors to start passing prices through, again, ultimately to the consumer. So I'm afraid we're going to see more of this as the trade war goes on.
Henrietta, let's talk about the new tariff threats against India. I know it's head spinning, hard to keep track of all of these, but tomorrow we're going to see tariffs go from 10% to 25% for India. And there's also the looming threat that President Trump could impose a 35% tariff as a penalty for their dealings with Russian energy. So what products could further be impacted?
Right. These are all your electronic components, everything from a computer to a calculator, textiles, rugs, home furnishings, all of that is going to get a very high 25% tariff rate. And the one thing I'd like to point out here is that even though manufacturers are trying to downplay, or they have been at least until recently, trying to downplay the impact of these tariffs, the American public is incredibly attuned to the fact that these are taxes that they have to pay. A CBS poll that came out this morning shows 66% of Americans, a huge number, believe that their costs of everyday items that they're going to buy in the next month are going to increase either a little bit or a lot. That is a tremendous amount of digested knowledge that Jared and I would both agree for an economic perspective is tremendous awareness on the part of the American public. And the India pieces, Brazil, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, they're all going up at midnight tonight.
And still, the president is charging ahead. The president is applying, Jared, a 50% tariff on Brazil for what appears to be just political pressure. What will happen if these tariffs are started, or if he's starting to use these as a tool to accomplish foreign policy goals?
One of the main things that happens on the back of that is something that I think has been somewhat underappreciated. Yes, August 1 is the deadline. This does not end tomorrow, by which I mean tariff chaos, Trump pressing his leverage, back and forth, deals going on and off. That is going to be ongoing. It will probably be ongoing until he leaves the White House. One of the reasons for that is that there are all these side deals being made. You've probably heard about them. Hundreds of billions that countries are promising to invest in the U.S. and buy energy. Once you look at those deals, they are as flimsy as can be. And Trump eventually will recognize that those promises, in his mind, are not being kept. So it's back to the bargaining table. So my concern is that this ongoing uncertainty, chaos, the consumer pain that Henrietta just took us through very eloquently, all of that is actually going to deepen. I wish it weren't the case. And I do agree with this very important point that people are onto this now. If you go back a few months, people thought tariffs were a good idea. Now they're really seeing the other side of that equation.
Jared Bernstein, Henrietta Treyz, thank you both.
On January 5th, 2007, a call with Fred Hyatt changed my life. I was dying a slow death at a corporate public relations firm during my second departure from journalism. Fred was the editorial page editor of the Washington Post, and he was on the hunt for an editorial writer. We'd been in touch a few years before, but nothing came of it. This time was different. Hyatt hired me. My first day was February 15th, 2007. In my memoir, Yet Here I Am, Lessons from a Black Man's Search for Home, I described my early days at the Washington Post as, quote, a swirl of terrified excitement. And over the next 18 years, 5 months, and 16 days, 15 of those years spent on the editorial board, I would write columns and interview newsmakers for my podcast and Post Live events, and host a weekly web show called First Look. During that time, we moved from the brutalist architecture of the Post building on 15th Street to the sleek, concrete-floored modernity of our new offices on K Street. Rather than toss his old file of research on me into the recycling bin, Fred gave it to me. There were printouts of my columns for the New York Daily News and Bloomberg News. He was looking to see if I was a good fit for the section. A critical decision made by Jeff Bezos this year that led to the resignation of David Shipley, who succeeded Fred after he passed away in 2021, forced me to contemplate whether the section was a good fit for me. In February, the owner of the Post decided that the section would focus on the twin pillars of personal liberties and free markets. We in the section received an email from our new editor which reiterated that and added, it's also important that we communicate with optimism about this country in particular and the future in general. How can we communicate with optimism about the future in general when we're living in the here and now where American democracy is in peril? Or put another way, how can one constantly extol the beauty of a home's doors, crown moldings, and windows when the rest of the house is engulfed in flames and its foundation is flooding? Unapologetic patriotism is incomplete if it doesn't allow for a mirror to be held up to America, her people, and her president, to hold them all accountable when they have strayed from her founding principles. The administration is playing chicken with federal courts. The administration is using masked federal agents to snatch people off the streets and send them to hellish prisons abroad. The administration deployed the military on the streets of an American city. The president is using his office to enrich himself and his family. The president has turned Congress, a co-equal branch of government, into the staff wing of the executive branch. And we're supposed to ignore it? Leave it to others to wrestle with on their news pages and websites? No. The Constitution gives us the inherent, unapologetically patriotic right to rail against such affronts to democracy and the rule of law. And the First Amendment demands it. That is tonight's last word on my last day at the Washington Post. Definitely the end of an era. I want to thank my colleagues at the Post for all their years of great work.